My name is Jake, and up until 3 days ago, my biggest problem was my homeowners association. I was the guy they whispered about. The one with the 10-foot fence, the solar panels, the basement that was less a man cave and more a this guy is waiting for the end of the world cave. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. While my neighbors were worrying about their prize-winning petunias, I was stress testing my water filtration system. It was a peaceful, if misunderstood, life. The last thing I remember of that world was arguing with Frank from 3 doors down. He was holding a violation notice, his face all pinched and red. Jake, the bylaws clearly state that rainwater collection barrels must be aesthetically pleasing and conform to the community's color palette. This thing is an eyesore. He was pointing at my brand new 1,500-gallon military green water tank. I remember taking a deep breath the way my therapist taught me. Frank, I said calmly, when the municipal water supply is compromised by a biological agent or a systemic grid failure, the community's color palette is going to be the last thing on your mind. You'll be begging for a sip of my aesthetically offensive water. He just sputtered, waving the paper in my face. I turned my back on him, walked into my house, and slammed the door. I was so angry, my blood was pounding in my ears. I stomped down to my basement to cool off, to just be surrounded by the beautiful, logical order of my preps. I ran my hand along the shelves of canned goods, the medical kits, the neatly stacked ammunition. This was sanity. This was control, and then the world dissolved. It wasn't a noise. It was the opposite of noise. A sudden, violent absence of sound, as if the universe had been put on mute. The shelves, the concrete floor, the very air in front of me, it all shimmered like a heat haze and then just unwove itself. I felt a sensation of being pulled, not through space, but through the very fabric of reality itself. It was a nauseating, terrifying freefall through a kaleidoscope of colors and concepts I couldn't comprehend. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, I was lying on my back, staring up at 2 moons in a lavender sky. I sat up, my head spinning. My basement was gone. My house was gone. I was in a clearing in a forest of towering purple-barked trees. The air smelled of alien pollen and damp earth. In the distance, I could see the spires of a city that looked like it was ripped from a fantasy novel. I was wearing the same cargo pants and t-shirt I'd had on during my argument with Frank. But next to me, as if whatever force had brought me here had recognized its necessity, was my everyday carry bug-out bag. I unzipped it with trembling hands. Water filter, fire starter, multi-tool, paracord, first aid kit, energy bars. It was all there. My last piece of home. That's when I heard the first scream. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated agony, cut short with a wet, tearing finality. It was followed by a sound I'd only ever heard in movies. A low, guttural, hungry moan. A thought, clear and cold. Cut through my disorientation. The SHTF, the shit has hit the fan. But this wasn't my fan. And this wasn't my shit, and I was terrifyingly, utterly unprepared. The first rule of any crisis is orient yourself. I slung my pack onto my back and moved. I didn't run blindly. I used the cover of the bizarre purple foliage, moving from tree to tree, my senses on high alert. The moans were multiplying, coming from the direction of the city. I needed high ground. I needed to see. I found a rocky outcrop that gave me a vantage point over the valley below. The fantasy city was under siege, but not by an army of orcs or dragons. It was being overrun by people, or what used to be people. They moved with the same shambling, broken gait I'd drilled for in countless scenarios. Zombies. Classic Romero-esque zombies. But there were twists. Their eyes glowed with a faint, sickly green light. Some of them had skin that was cracked and smoldered, like cooling lava. Others left trails of frost on the ground. A magical zombie plague, of course. Why would my Isekai'ed adventure be simple? I watched as a company of knights in gleaming plate armor tried to hold a bridge leading into the city. They were brave, I'll give them that. A knight would swing his greatsword, cleaving a zombie in 2. But the moment one of them got grabbed, bitten, or even deeply scratched, they'd fall, convulse, and within minutes, get back up with those same glowing green eyes. Their tactics were abysmal. They fought in a tight phalanx, which was just a buffet line for the horde. They had no concept of a killing zone, of funneling, of ranged engagement. They were treating a pandemic like a pitched battle. It was a slaughter. My prepper brain was screaming. They're not destroying the brain. They're letting the infected get too close. They have no fallback position. As I watched the city fall, a new sound reached me, the clatter of hooves on stone coming up the path toward my outcrop. I ducked down, peering over the edge. A small group was fleeing the city, a man in ornate robes who was clearly a wizard, a female elf with a bow, and a dwarf with a bloody axe. They looked exhausted, terrified, and incompetent. The wizard kept turning and firing off flashes of light from his staff. They were loud, bright, and did nothing but vaporize one or two zombies while drawing the attention of 100 more. The elf's arrows were precise, but she was aiming for center mass, not the head. The dwarf was just hacking limbs, which only created crawling, still dangerous torsos. They were leading a train of at least 50 of the infected right toward them. Right toward me. The old me, the one from the HOA neighborhood, would have hidden. But the prepper in me knew the calculus. They were a liability, but they were also intelligence assets. They knew this world. And right now, they were about to become a bigger, noisier problem if they died and turned right on my doorstep. I had to act. I had to show them there was a different way. A quieter, more efficient, more sensible way. They did follow. Thankfully, self-preservation was a universal instinct. I led them on a winding, breakneck run through the alien forest for what felt like an hour, using terrain to break line of sight, splashing through a shallow stream to throw off any scent trail, basic evasion tactics that seemed like pure sorcery to them. Finally, when the moans had faded to a distant murmur, I signaled a stop in a dense thicket. We all collapsed, gasping for air. The dwarf leaned on his axe, his chest heaving. The elf stood poised, listening, her long ears twitching. The wizard just slumped against a tree, his robes singed and his face pale. After a moment, the dwarf was the first to speak. "I am Borin Stonehand," he grunted, thumping a fist to his chest. "This is Lyra of the Silverwood," he gestured to the elf, who gave a curt nod. "And the walking catastrophe is Kalen the Arcane." Kalen scowled but was too winded to retort. "Jake," I said, still catching my breath. "Jake from a long way away. What manner of magic was that?" Lyra asked, her voice like the rustling of leaves. Her sharp eyes were fixed on my paracord, now coiled back on my hip. "You used no incantation, no focus. You shaped the forest itself into a weapon." "It's not magic," I said, pulling out my water bottle and taking a sip. "It's physics and tactics. You create a problem for them that's easy for you to solve." Borin grunted, impressed. "A warrior's cunning, I like it. Better than flashy lights that get you killed." He shot a glare at Kalen. Kalen finally found his voice. "I saved us from those creatures at the pass. You drew every single one of them within 5 miles right to us." I snapped, my patience fraying. I gestured around us. "This isn't a battle for glory. This is a pest control problem on a global scale. You don't fight a rat infestation by setting off a bomb in your basement. You use traps. You use poison. You stay quiet." The concept was alien to them. Their entire worldview was built on direct, honorable confrontation. I was talking about asymmetrical warfare, and they didn't have the vocabulary for it. "We must reach the High King's fortress in the Iron Peak Mountains," Lyra stated. "It is the last bastion. But the lowlands are lost." Her voice held a deep, resonant grief. "And how do you propose we do that?" Kalen whined. "The roads are choked with the Blightwalkers. We are 4 against a kingdom of the dead." I looked at my small pack, then at the 3 of them. A wizard who was a walking noise complaint, a dwarf who only understood direct force, and an elf who was the only one who seemed capable of learning. And me, a prepper with a multi-tool and a head full of worst-case scenarios. It was the worst fire team in history, but they were all I had. "We don't take the roads," I said, unfolding my mind, thinking not like a warrior, but like a survivor. "We move at night. We move quietly. And we don't fight unless we have to. Our first priority isn't the mountains. It's finding a secure location. Somewhere we can fortify, resupply, and for the love of God, get you people to understand the concept of a silent kill." I was no longer just a survivor. I had become a teacher. And my students were a trio of fantasy archetypes who were about to get a crash course in seer school. As the fleeing party scrambled up the path, I made my move. I didn't stand up and shout. I didn't fire a gun I didn't have. I moved laterally, staying in the tree line. Parallel to their route, about 50 yards ahead of them, the path narrowed into a natural choke point between 2 large boulders. Perfect. While the elf loosed another useless arrow and the wizard prepared another flashy, attention-drawing spell, I was working. I swiftly unspooled a length of my 550 paracord. I tied a series of quick, tension-heavy knots, creating a low tripwire about ankle-high. Just beyond it, I used my multi-tool to sharpen two sturdy branches into crude stakes, angling them towards the approaching horde and securing them to the ground. It was a rudimentary cheval de frise, the kind of obstacle that would slow a crowd and create easy stationary targets. The dwarf was the first to see me. "By the forge, a scout!" he bellowed, pointing his axe at me. "Help us, man!" I ignored him. I finished the stakes, then moved back, climbing a few feet up the rock face for a better position. The lead zombies hit the tripwire. They tumbled forward, their shambling momentum working against them. They fell directly onto the sharpened stakes. It wasn't a glorious death. It was a messy, impaling end. But it was silent, and it worked. The elf, her eyes wide, saw it. She saw the effectiveness. She didn't say anything, but her next arrow was different. She took an extra second, aimed, and let fly. It took a stumbling zombie right through the eye socket. It dropped, permanently. The wizard, however, was panicked. He saw the pileup and began chanting, his staff glowing with violent red energy. "No," I hissed, the first word I'd spoken in this world. "No magic. The noise." He either didn't hear me or didn't care. A fireball erupted from his staff, incinerating the 5 zombies caught in the choke point. The explosion was deafening. The flash lit up the entire mountainside, and from the city and the forests around us, a new chorus of moans answered. 100 more, maybe 200, all now turning toward the sound of the explosion. The wizard looked triumphant for a second, until he saw the sea of glowing green eyes now shifting in our direction. His face fell. The dwarf cursed. "Fool of a mage! You've doomed us!" I didn't have time for their blame game. The choke point was gone, and we were now the center of attention. "This way!" I yelled, not waiting for an argument. I jumped down from the rock and sprinted deeper into the woods, away from the main path, hoping they would have the sense to follow. The first lesson had been a partial success. I had shown them a better way, but I had also learned a crucial, terrifying fact about this world. The biggest threat wasn't just the zombies, it was the sheer unadulterated incompetence of the people who lived here. Our respite lasted 2 days. On the 3rd morning, Lyra, who was on watch, slipped back into the cave, her face grim. "A scouting party," she whispered. 20, perhaps 30 walkers. "They've picked up our trail. They will be here within the hour." Panic flickered across Kalen's face. Boren hefted his axe. "Then we make our stand here. A fine place to die." "No," I said, my mind already racing, assessing our resources, the terrain, the enemy's capabilities. "We're not dying today. And we're not fighting a stand-up battle. We're setting a trap." I laid out the plan. It was simple, brutal, and efficient. We wouldn't be in the cave when they arrived. We'd be above it. We spent the next hour in a frenzy of quiet activity. While Lyra kept watch, Boren and I, using his immense strength, gathered every loose rock and sizable boulder we could safely manage, piling them on a ledge overlooking the path to the cave entrance. Kalen, under my strict instruction, used his magic not for fireballs, but for subtle earth-shaping, weakening the base of a large, precariously balanced pillar of rock above the ledge. Then, the final touch. I had Kalen use a tiny, almost silent cantrip to create a faint, pulsing light, like the glow of a weak magical artifact, and place it just inside the cave entrance. The perfect lure. We then took up our positions on the ledge above, hidden from view. We waited. The moans grew closer. The lead walkers, their green eyes fixed on the pulsing light, shambled directly into the kill zone below us. "Now, Kalen!" I hissed. He focused, sweat beading on his forehead. With a low rumble, the weakened pillar gave way. It crashed down onto our prepared pile of rocks, triggering a massive avalanche. Boulders and rubble rained down on the horde, crushing them, burying them. It was over in less than a minute. The silence that followed was profound. Dust settled. Below, the entire scouting party was gone, entombed under tons of rock. Boren stared, his axe hanging limply in his hand. By my ancestors, we didn't even swing a blade. Lyra looked at me, her expression unreadable. "You did not fight them, you removed them, like a farmer clearing a field of stones." Kalen was breathing heavily, but a wide grin spread across his face. "The school of practical magic, I like it. Far more elegant than hurling fire, it was a complete and total victory. Zero risk to us, minimal expenditure of energy, maximum effect. In that moment, the dynamic shifted irrevocably. I was no longer just Jake from a long way away. I was the strategist, the artificer, the one who understood the hidden rules of this broken world. Boren's brute strength, Lyra's keen senses, even Kalen's volatile magic, they were just tools. I was the one who knew how to wield them. The prepper had become the general. Our first secure location was a cave I found high up a cliff face. It was a pain to get to, which was the whole point. Before we entered, I stopped them. "Stop," I said, barring the entrance with my arm. "We clear it first." I took out my fire steel and a piece of char cloth. I wasn't making a torch. The smoke and light would be a beacon. Instead, I fashioned a small shielded light using my water bottle and my headlamp, creating a dim, diffuse glow. "What are you doing?" Boren asked, confused. "A light spell would be brighter." "Invisible from a mile away," I replied, not looking up. "This is just for us." I entered the cave low and slow, my makeshift light piercing the darkness. It was empty save for some animal droppings. "Clear," I said. Once inside, the first thing I did was have Boren help me roll a large stone to partially block the entrance. Not all the way, just enough to slow anything down and create a defensible bottleneck. Lyra watched, fascinated, as I then set up a simple early warning system just outside, using a few of my empty cans and some paracord. Kalen immediately slumped against the wall, exhausted. "Finally, rest." "Not yet," I said, my voice firm. "You're all contaminated." They stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. "You've been in close contact with the infected. Their fluids are on your clothes, your armor. That's the primary transmission vector." I pointed to a small stagnant pool of water in the back of the cave. "Everyone clean yourselves and your gear. Scrub with water. If you have any open cuts, I need to know now." It was like I was talking to children. They had no concept of hygiene, of cross-contamination. Kalen's robes were spattered with black Icarus blood. Boren's axe was caked with it. Lyra was the first to understand. "The blight spreads through the blood and bile," she said, a look of dawning horror on her face. "You are saying we carry it with us?" "Exactly," I said. "You can't just wave a magic wand and make a disease go away. You have to manage it. You have to contain it." I showed them how to boil water from the stagnant pool using a hollowed-out stone I heated with a tiny, controlled fire. I demonstrated how to properly bandage a minor cut on Boren's arm using a strip of clean cloth from my kit, boiled first in the water. As I worked, I talked. I explained the principles of quarantine, the importance of a clean water supply, the necessity of waste disposal far from your living area. It was prepping 101. To them, it was a revelation. Kalen, for the first time, looked at me not with disdain, but with a scholar's curiosity. "This knowledge," he said, gesturing at my simple setup, "it is a form of arcane study, a school of practical magic I have never seen." "It's not magic," I repeated, for what felt like the 100th time. "It's just knowing how things work." But as I saw the awe in their eyes, I finally understood. In a world that relied on flashy, unreliable spells, my boring, practical, real-world knowledge was a form of magic, a more powerful and reliable one. I held the codex of common sense, and to them, it was the most potent grimoire they had ever seen. We left the cave and the pile of rubble that was the walker's tomb behind. The journey to the Iron Peak Mountains was still ahead of us, but we were no longer a group of frightened refugees. We were a unit, and I was their drill instructor. As we traveled, I drilled them relentlessly. I taught them hand signals for silent communication. I showed Lyra how to identify natural choke points and potential ambush sites. I forced Kalen to practice his minor utilitarian spells, creating a brief mist for concealment, using a tiny spark to light a fire, hardening the ground to slow pursuit. Boren was the hardest to train. He hated the sneaking about, but even he came around when I showed him how to set a deadfall trap that could crush a walker's skull with terrifying efficiency. "A good trap is like a good axe swing," I told him. "One motion, one kill, but the trap doesn't get tired." We avoided every conflict we could. When we couldn't, we used misdirection, noisemakers thrown in the opposite direction, and silent takedowns. Lyra became a master of the headshot with her bow. Boren learned that a well-placed, quiet shove off a cliff was better than a loud, drawn-out axe fight. We found other survivors along the way, a handful of terrified farmers, a wounded soldier.
We didn't turn them away.
We absorbed them, and I taught them too. The Prepper's Codex, as Kalen had dubbed it, began to spread. We reached the foothills of the Iron Peak Mountains after 2 weeks. The High King's fortress was a formidable sight, carved into the mountain itself. As we approached the heavily guarded gate, a captain of the guard looked down at our ragged, dirty, but highly disciplined group. "State your business," he barked. Boren stepped forward. "We are survivors from Fallowhaven. We seek sanctuary." The captain's eyes swept over us, lingering on my nondescript clothing and modern backpack. "You are fortunate to have made it this far. The Blight has claimed all the lowlands." "It wasn't fortune," Lyra said, her voice clear and strong. She gestured to me. "We had a guide." The captain looked skeptical. "A scout? From which regiment?" Kalen couldn't contain himself. "He is no scout. He is a master of the arcane practical, a scholar of a lost school." I just sighed. It was going to be a long, long explanation. As we were ushered inside the fortress, I looked back at the blighted world we had traversed. I thought of Frank and my HOA, my water tank, my quiet, orderly basement. That life was a universe away. This was my world now. A world of magic and monsters, where the most powerful spell was boiled water and the sharpest sword was a well-laid plan. I had arrived with nothing but a bag of tricks and a head full of worst-case scenarios. And in doing so, I had become something I never expected, a legend in the making. The Prepper's journey was over. The rebuilding was about to begin, and I had a feeling my next project would be fortifying this entire mountain. Some habits, it seems, are impossible to break,